my introductory talk will be about digital democracy. Is there actually a future for democracy? And if so, how may it look like? For those who are fans of the Complexity Science Hub, they may remember that we had a workshop back in 2017 on reinventing society in the digital age. And since then, actually also before, we have been working on that subject. So what can we reinvent about society, how it works? And we had another workshop also here at the Complexity Science Hub, which happened to be on September 11, 2018, such a meaningful date, the same date as today, where we tried basically to override this terrible history by some positive future to be brought about by Climate City Olympics. Now, today, my talk will be about digital democracy. We all know that the world is faced with big challenges. Sustainability is one of our biggest challenges. I think there are few people who doubt that. For that reason, the United Nations came up with 17 Sustainable Development Goals back in 2015. In fact, there are more than 170 targets. But most of the time, we're just talking about one of them. And the question is that really enough? And why is this happening? You know? There's some people who have basically proposed that we could or should be saving the world, basically with a war room approach. So we would basically put together all the data about this planet in a huge data center to build a prediction machine, and a machine that would basically allow us to control the future. This has been built. A digital twin of the world and its people has been built, and actually one of those systems is called Sentient World Simulation, goes back many years actually, and you can imagine that in these times where we have the Internet of Things and even nanotechnology and Internet of Bodies and Internet of bio-nano things, that we can know a lot about this Earth, and we can have a very detailed digital twin. But is it really a digital copy that is like reality, or is it more like deepfake? And this is really an important question. If only 1% of parameters are wrongly specified, what would that mean in situations when we talk about life and death situations? So I've thought about this approach a long time, and I think it's not expected to work well. And that's, I think, also the lesson that the public has recently learned when people, really big shots in the area of AI, have suddenly collectively warned the world of existential threats, which I think really has to be seen in that context of being able to run an AI system that would manage or control the world in many aspects. What could go wrong? I mean, you know that ChatGPT is a wonderful thing, but on the other hand, it comes up with lots of lies when it comes to, you know, references, citations, and all these kind of things, and also many other plausibly sounding things. But in many facts, it's fake news, unfortunately. So what does that mean if that technology is being used to run planet Earth? Probably there would be some issues. But democracy has not only been under pressure by military thinking, which is always about power and control, but also by companies. And for example, a company that was called Facebook in the past, now Meta, they basically came up with this and break things. And that could also include, of course, democracy and human rights if you don't pay attention. There is a famous quote that says, democracy is an outdated technology. It has brought wealth, health, and happiness for billions of people all over the world, but now we want to try something new. Sounds a bit concerning, to be honest. Peter Thiel, you know very well. He says we are in a deadly race between politics and technology. The fate of our world may depend on the effort of a single person who makes the world safe for capitalism. I guess he was thinking perhaps of himself. You know, he's running Palantir in particular, one of the worst surveillance systems altogether in this world, I guess. And many businesses have been suggesting that we could run cities like a business. And you may remember that Geoffrey West and others, including myself, have always warned that this is not going to work well. But it brings us to the issue of smart cities, which is about the commercialization of cities, among others. Not just about sensors and intelligence, and putting a lot of sensors does not necessarily make cities smart right away. But what has certainly happened is that cities have been put under a microscope, and that means our life has been looked into quite in some detail, in many cases without our knowledge and consent. And Larry Page of Google said, I think as technologists, we should have some safe places where we can try out some new things and figure out what is the effect on society, what's the effect on people without having to deploy them into the normal world. And people who like those kind of things can go there and experience that, but we don't have mechanisms for that. So to put it a little bit more simple, he wanted to have experimental space where he could just reinvent the world and societies and do what he wants and come up with a future society. And this is what has happened, actually, in some cities, some Google cities, including the waterfront project in Toronto. And actually, people didn't like it so much, because they haven't been asked. And in fact, people got very much worried about this being some kind of modern. So what is going wrong here? The next thing is that you may ask yourself, how many cities actually are there in Europe that are smart? So could you guess? Say a number. 30? 5? 0. Oh, okay. So we have between 0, 5, 30, and all. And this is what you find in the document EU Agenda, 240 European cities. Could you name them at all? What do we know about it? Doesn't democracy imply that there should be transparency on how our money is spent and what kind of algorithms are being used and run, to manage the city? We know nothing, and most likely because things went wrong in Toronto, so they saw if people don't know, it will be okay. But is it really okay? This is something that we have to talk about. Now, there has been this idea of a data-driven, AI-controlled benevolent dictator. And the data would, of course, be created by surveillance, Internet of Things, basically. And the question is, what would such a benevolent dictator do? Let's suppose we were a benevolent dictator. So we were in control of the world, and we just wanted to do good things. Is this going to be working out well? Well, a benevolent dictator would prefer to have a plannable, predictable, and controllable world. And in fact, that fits well to a data-driven society. And in fact, the concepts for a data-driven society have been gone so far, as you can see over here, in a document that was put out by the Ministry of Interior in Germany. Could be going so far that we would have a post-choice and a post-voting society. Are we still needed? Or are we just a disturbance of the perfect smart city? So surely this is not well compatible with democracy and freedom, but it could still be a perfect city. Could it? That's a question I will discuss this evening when we have the panel discussion, smart cities, digital zoo or participatory society. And you can imagine a digital zoo sounds a little bit like Animal Farm, you know, like, are we going to end up in a digitally controlled society? And what can we do about it? Now, we have been critical about it already many years back. We put out what was got to known as Digital Manifesto, but the title really was Digital Democracy rather than Data Dictatorship. And why is this? And in fact, the title has made it also on a book title from Brittany Kaiser. She's reported about Cambridge Analytica and the scandals around it. And I think she became quite famous. And so the subject of digital democracy is out there, and also of data dictatorship. Now, a benevolent dictator, you know, would probably do the following: determine our or everyone's actually individual goal functions or utilities, as economists would say, then determine an average, and then find an optimal solution to this average utility function, and then implement it. This is one of the really widespread paradigms that we have today. And what happens is that we would have the perfect solution for somebody who doesn't exist. There is no average person. So in other words, we don't have a perfect solution for anybody. And so optimization, strangely enough, even though the word sounds so grandiose and so positive, you know, is perhaps the problem. Goal functions are one-dimensional because, you know, you want to compare two solutions. Is this better or worse? You need to have a greater or smaller relationship, mathematically speaking. But societal needs are multidimensional. We want to have prosperity, sustainability, health, education, culture, happiness, and peace, and, you know, you name it, a lot more. So goal functions tend to oversimplify societies dramatically, I would say, and their needs. And the result is a polycrisis. I think this is a human-generated polycrisis that comes from the application of the wrong concept for the wrong kind of problem. So the question then is, are there any other ways to decide? Yes, of course, vote. Voting does not require an average utility function. Voting works for very different people. In a pluralistic society, diversity is not an issue. That's why we vote. However, yes, no majority voting, even though the most common approach, is among the worst voting methods ever. And there are various issues, including what people sometimes call the tyranny of the majority, or tyranny of the majority. Some people think it's happening in some countries these days. Perhaps it has always been happening. But when we come back to cities, we see quite clearly what the negative implications of majority voting are. Because if you only go about the majority of votes, then those districts of a city that have more voters will always win. And that tends to be the center of the city, while the periphery basically gets very little. And this is a typical situation that we know from many cities around the world, and it creates the phenomenon of banlieues, poor areas of the city with a lot of violence and desperation and deprivation. And we also have the city hinterland divide. So, this happens since many decades, and nobody did anything against it. And one of the reasons is that we used the wrong voting rule. Nobody was even thinking about it. So let's look into voting. So what is it about? First of all, it's about us, the voters, and our preferences. And the important point is that we should be able to somehow measure those preferences. There are different ways to do that. I'll come and talk about it a little bit. And then once we have the voting input, we will have to do a vote aggregation in order to figure out what will finally be done. That's the democratic outcome, okay? Now, in order to look into this, we have created an app. It's called Vote App. And it allows to look into different kinds of voting methods and what are the implications of those. And so there are different kinds of ways to measure voting input. Approval voting is the most common, perhaps, where you have a list and you can basically approve some options or not. This is not a very detailed measurement of your preferences. There's a better way, which is called combined approval voting, and here you can approve, disapprove, or abstain. But there are also other ways, like ranked voting, so-called Borda score, and you can basically rank options according to your preferences. Or you could actually distribute a certain number of points, say 10, over those options that are there, and not only choose the options that you like, but also indicate the strengths of your preference. So you can express your preferences a lot better than with approval voting, okay? So we can improve the voting process, which is the important point here. Now, what happens then in the ballot box? So basically, we have to aggregate, right? And for majority voting, it's just the projects that have most votes that are being approved and will be implemented. In some cities, not even this, but okay. What we have forgotten completely here in the majority voting is the cost of the project. Each project comes with a cost, right? And perhaps we should be considering this. And this can be done in different ways, and it's very important and of particular interest in the context of so-called participatory budgeting. Here, the city council puts away some money that will be decided by the citizens on how to use it. And basically, we can have different kinds of aggregation here. So optimal Knapsack, for example, looks at the vote to cost ratio. So more expensive projects need more votes to be approved. And that results in a different list of projects to be chosen. Or we can have the method of equal shares, where you get a virtual amount of money that will be distributed over the projects. And those projects that get enough money to be realized will be put into reality. Now, what is important about this is those different voting methods lead to different outcomes. You can see that very clearly, that the distributions look very different over here. And this has the potential of including minority interests, for example, have a lot more broadly distributed outcomes, which benefits more groups of society. And that is what we probably need in order to make better cities of the future. And in fact, this is not just theory. Participatory budgeting is around for already some time. Barcelona is one of the famous cities in this context, but there are many more. And recently we had the opportunity to do this participatory budgeting together with the city of Aarau in Switzerland. So you can see some people in the room who were involved. And you can see over here, it's a process that requires engagement of the citizens. It is a process that goes over many months, even more than a year if you do it well. And you have to prepare for it well, you have to announce it well. And there is a certain process that you have to do. And first it starts with the collection of ideas, and then they have to be made more concrete, and eventually there will be a vote and an implementation, right? And so you can see over here, this is how it works. So the citizens assemble those who are interested, and there would be a collection of ideas. There's a deliberation going on, and many different ideas would be proposed. And there's brainstorming, you know, you can see the Mentimeter over here, what this is all about, unfortunately over here in German. And then those ideas are put on the map. It says, our Aarau, our ideas. And now you see all those different sticky notes. Those are ideas that have been proposed on that evening. And eventually, they have to be worked out, to be made more concrete. And so basically, the spectrum of ideas is narrowed down by consideration of practicality, and also, is there enough support and engagement to really make it happen? And in the end, there were around, I think, 32 proposals that citizens had to vote about. Quite a lot, I think, shows really a lot of engagement. And this engagement was also promoted by going out of the city hall and putting posters into the area, even at bus stops, to make people engage with the city and with the project. And so then there was a final countdown. People were spreading their votes, their points over the different projects. For this, they were informed well about how the procedure works in principle. So they understand what they have to do, distribute those points over different projects according to their liking. And that in order to be successful with a certain choice, projects would have to gather enough votes, also considering the cost of the project. And this is what was the result. So in fact, the winning projects generally had a better vote to cost ratio. You see the ones with the full dots on the left. So they tend to be above a certain diagonal line. And so this worked out well. And rather than just 70 projects according to a majority voting rule, we had 17 instead. And rather than having those projects concentrated in the center, as would have been according to a majority rule, those projects are spread out all over the city. So there are a lot more happy people over here. Plus, trust was generated through transparency, and there was more voter satisfaction because people understood what was going on. And this is, of course, very important. You will hear more about this in the course of the week. Regula, for example, is with us. Vangelis is with us. And so in conclusion, democracy can be upgraded. In fact, there are many ways to do this. I just told you about how we can improve democracy by changing the voting rule, but there are other approaches based on collective intelligence, crowdsourcing, crowd sensing, citizen science, hackathons, fab labs, makerspaces, open innovation, co-creation, open source urbanism, city Olympics, challenges or city cups, which also can help to improve democracy. So there are many possibilities, and I've been talking about them many times, also over here in Vienna. And we have basically engaged in most or even all of those different techniques and researched them. So in conclusion, one should implement more democracy, not less. And democracy should not be about winning against others. That's my conclusion. But democracy should be about pluralistic solutions. I mean, not everyone doing the same thing, not everyone agreeing necessarily on the same thing, but doing different things that all make progress. Pluralistic solutions which support collective intelligence and catalyze benefits for many. Adaptation rather than prediction, co-evolution rather than planning, and cooperation rather than control. So be a game changer. You can change the rules. And if you do that, there's going to be a better world. Thank you very much.